So today we will begin to contemplate trees for life with appreciation and gratitude. Our MC this afternoon will be David Spence. Born in Winnipeg, where trees are often scarce, David has resided in other Canadian prairie locales where trees are also scarce. Then in 1980, he moved to the west coast of BC, where trees are much more abundant. And then 7 years ago to Brentwood Bay on Vancouver Island, where trees are not only more abundant, but significantly larger than on the prairies. During his life's journey, he has been an active member of the Royal Commonwealth Society since 1990 in one way or another. Now he is president of the Vancouver Island branch, wherein he provides leadership for the Society's programs and projects, especially Trees for Life, as it is emerging in this era of COVID-19 pandemic. I'll pass it over to you, David.
Thank you, Astra. Welcome to everybody. My task is to introduce to you each of the speakers that we have as panelists today. The first one will be Dr. John Innes of UBC. He is the Dean of the Faculty of Forestry. He came to British Columbia in 1999, having previously worked in the Swiss Federal Institute for Forest, Snow, and Landscape Research. He is actively involved with climate change research, particularly its effects on forest ecosystems. Dr. Innes also chairs the Commonwealth Forestry Association. A couple of years ago, John spoke at the Royal Commonwealth Society Vancouver Island Commonwealth Day luncheon about the Queen's Commonwealth canopy and Canada's contribution as the Great Bear Rainforest. John, welcome again, and the mic is yours.
Thank you very much, David. I've been asked to say a little bit about myself and then why I appreciate trees. I grew up in a place rather like David did that's not renowned for its forests, which was the east coast of Scotland near St Andrews. However, much of my time was spent in Perthshire in Scotland, which does have a lot of trees, although curiously enough, most of them originate from British Columbia. Over the course of my life, I've worked with forests, with the United Kingdom Forestry Commission, then in Switzerland, and for the last 20 years or so, I've been here in Vancouver, Canada. So during that time, I've worked on both the industrial side, I would say, and on the conservation side, although those two different poles are actually seemingly coming closer and closer together. Why do I appreciate trees? Well, trees are absolutely fundamental. Without trees, we wouldn't be here. Trees are the underpinning of the world's biodiversity. I know life originated in the oceans, but we don't live in the oceans. We're terrestrial and we require oxygen. And trees and other vegetation provides some of the oxygen that we need. It underpins all life on Earth. Someone once told me that we are here on this planet as the guests of trees. And I think that's actually a very nice way of looking at it. So trees are where much biodiversity originates. Trees and forests are also essential for protecting and preserving our soils and also our fresh water. Any of you who live in Vancouver will maybe not realize just how dependent we are on forests, particularly in the Capilano catchment, for supplying us with clean water. But when there were some landslides that occurred into the reservoir, and those landslides would normally only occur if there was some sort of a problem with the trees, we all had to start buying bottled water. And you very quickly realize how we sometimes take water for granted. There are very many First Nations communities where water remains an ongoing issue. Trees are also part of climate and climate change. They are actually a very effective means of soaking up carbon. And it's actually the loss of trees that has contributed to the greenhouse effect that is affecting us all. We also value trees because they benefit our health and well-being. And this is really only been recognized formally in recent years, although that effect has been with us forever. We know that people can relax when they go into forests. We know that there are effects on your brain that reduce stress. We know that there are a lot of spiritual benefits that come from just being in a forest. If any of you have visited Cathedral Grove, and I'm sure many of you have, preferably on a day when it hasn't got 50,000 tourists present, you can actually begin to appreciate just how much that spiritual feeling is important. And then, of course, I have to say this as a forester, trees provide wood. And wood is actually one of our greenest building materials. We are lucky in British Columbia. A lot of our buildings are made from wood. If you come from Europe, you'd know that wood is only used to a much lower proportion than it is here. And we benefit from that. People who are in a wooden building tend to have far fewer problems. We don't get the sick building syndrome. We have a lot of benefits. We also know some really surprising things, like if you have exposed wood in a hospital room, people will heal faster. If they have a view that extends onto trees, they will heal faster. We don't understand why that is. We don't understand the mechanisms, but we do know that it's been replicated time and time again in terms of experiments. So trees provide us with so many benefits, and that's why I appreciate them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. I'd like to introduce the second member of our panel, Sarah Abbott. She is an associate professor in the Department of Film at the University of Regina and a Doctor of Social Sciences candidate at Royal Roads University. Her interdisciplinary doctorate explores the sentient rationality of trees. And I think that means in part that it explores how trees communicate one with another. So thank you for joining us today, Sarah, and the mic is over to you.
Thank you so much, David. And, okay, we're on. Okay, thank you, David. Thank you, John. It's really wonderful to be here. I'm coming to you from Treaty 4 territory in Saskatchewan. These are the homelands of the Cree, the Saulteaux, the Dakota, Lakota, Nakota peoples, Métis Nation, and also the Dene. And it's wonderful to be zooming in to Vancouver Island. And thank you for the introduction. I just want to make a small correction. It's the sentient relationality of trees that I'm studying, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And I think as John and Francis and I kind of talk about our appreciation of trees, we'll be building on similar aspects. I loved what you just shared with us, John, and really appreciate some things that I learned. The looking at exposed wood being a health boost for us is amazing. So I'd like to start actually with a couple of quotes. The first one is from Stefano Mancuso, who is an Italian plant scientist who focuses on intelligence in plants. And he has this great quote. It's, "Trees are extraordinary beings in every respect. You do not become the primary source of a planet's life by chance." And I think this follows nicely on what John shared with us. And the next little passage that I'd like to read to you is from Francis Hallé, who is a botanist and a biologist in France. And he focuses on tree architecture and rainforests. And this is the book. It's the Atlas of Poetic Botany. And he talks about the definition of a tree. So I'll read a little bit here. What is the definition of a tree? When I say the word tree, everyone can see what I'm talking about. But as soon as we try to define it, it proves to be nearly impossible. Does it mean wood, branches? Is it a matter of having a single trunk, or can there be several? What about leaves? How do we provide a definition that leaves room for tropical and fossil trees? Even now in the 21st century, there is no consensus over any definition of tree. Students in European forestry schools are given a definition that only covers trees in Europe, as if our trees with a single trunk, wood, branches, and a dense foliar crown, and an overall height of more than 7 meters were the only real ones. The oak, beech, and linden have nothing to worry about. But such a definition nor tropical trees. In the tropics, there are trees with a dozen trunks, not just one. Others, such as palms, have no branches or wood. Still others have no leaves, for instance, cacti or the large euphorbia found in Africa. And I like this little passage because it touches on a lot of the things that I'm interested in with regards to trees. And this idea that, coming from a European or Western standpoint, it's only our definition that counts, which is what he refers to. And he actually did find that he thought he found a definition that worked until he discovered underground trees. Underground trees were found in South Africa, in Pretoria, and they're about 1,000 years old. And it seems that they have evolved to kind of not be struck by lightning. So that's quite fascinating. Yeah, and I just, again, I so appreciate trees for the air that they give us, the climate they create, the homes that they create for other beings who are not human, the nutrients that they also supply them, the shade. They are fundamental to our life on Earth. I also really appreciate them as complex, intelligent, sentient beings, and recognize also that they have very complex systems within their very much aliveness. They communicate between themselves. There's been a lot of work and research that's shown, as you probably know from Suzanne Simard at UBC, the way that trees communicate underground through their mycorrhizal systems and in collaboration with fungi. And they, so they communicate between themselves and they support each other in that way, but they also communicate and support each other beings as well. I'm also really fascinated by the variety of reproduction in trees. And I was just reading how the pine cone is not alive, the cells are not alive, but the cells on each side of each piece of the pine cone, they're different kinds of cells. So when it's quite dry, the interior cells will shrink to close the cone. And when it's moist, there are cells on the back side of these little pieces that open up the cone so that the seeds can emerge. And then also, of course, be protected when the time is not right for the seeds to come out. As if you've read my bio, you also know that part of my research involves interspecies communication. So I'm very interested in what the trees offer us for people who can connect with them in many different ways. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. But as a kind of summary there, I'm very interested in the ways that trees want to collaborate with humans. And also they are so patient with us and they're so generous. And also, as we move to understand trees as sentient and intelligent and conscious beings rather than biomechanical matter, which we have for a very, very long time thought of, it really reflects on our own humanity. We start to realize how self-centered human beings are when we just see trees and other parts of nature as resources for our own purposes. And we realize that modes of respect and reciprocity have largely been lost. And this comes from all of us here today, all of us on the planet, being originally indigenous people. And as we move through Western ideology, that has been removed from us through our education and other systems. And so when we become more aware of trees in this way, I think we become more sensitive and we become more accepting of who we are as humans. and our gifts and our limitations, and that we live in deep connection and interrelation with trees and other non-humans. So thank you.
Good. Thank you very much, Sarah, for that introduction. I'd like to move on to our third panelist this morning or this afternoon, depending on which time zone you are. Frances Litman is an international award-winning photographer, community activator, and multimedia producer. She has voluntarily coordinated some of North America's largest Earth Day festivals and has co-founded the Community Trees Matter Network. So welcome to you, Frances, and over to you.
Thank you, David, and thank you, everybody, and beautiful introductions from Sarah and John. And I am just honored to be part of this. And as a photographer, as somebody who has been a creative person, the beauty of trees is what obviously speaks to my soul in a very, very deep way. And that has been something that has been ingrained in me actually since a child. And since we were asked, what is our personal experience with trees? I'd just like to mention that I'm here in gratitude on the territories of the Coast Salish people here in Victoria, British Columbia, and give absolute gratitude for their stewardship so that we can enjoy and appreciate the abundance of beauty that surrounds us here. And it's that beauty that is just, like I say, stirred my soul. I live in an area that is pretty much quite industrial, and there's a lot of concrete. I'm in a Esquimalt area of Victoria, and if you look probably at an aerial photograph, you would see that I maybe have the most trees in my area, my neighborhood, because I'm an avid tree lover, and I have a tree actually just outside my window, probably 5 feet away, that is actually probably 110-year-old pine, ponderosa pine, and it's growing actually underneath my house. Now, most people would probably at this point be cutting down a tree like that for fear that their foundation was going to be ruined, but it's been phenomenal. I've been in this house for 26 years, and I have watched this tree continue to grow in a way that works in respect to the other trees around it, including my house. And the amount of wildlife that I have seen outside of my window because of the trees I have, I'm like in a tree house. It's been an absolute education in how much life one tree can support. And when I look at the development that's happening all around us and around me in my own neighborhood, and I see these lots being scraped bare of every earthworm, every tree is being taken down so that people can put up a house that doesn't seem to complement or work with the natural landscape. It just amazes me, because I have come to learn that one tree can support up to 10,000 species. And when I see this out my window, I mean, you can see so much of that. You can't maybe see all 10,000, but you start to realize the interconnectivity when you really look at a tree and how much life one tree does support. So as a result, my deep love for trees led me to actually starting something called Creatively United for the Planet. And I'm just somebody who just had this deep love and concern for trees and for what was happening in an ecological way in my neighborhood, that I thought, gee, you know, Earth Day comes, Earth Day goes, and perhaps it's time to showcase all those organizations that are working really hard to bring to our awareness the importance of our ecological civilization and how important this interconnectivity is. So I brought all those people to a festival, and much to my surprise, thousands of people showed up. And for years, continued to do this festival off the side of my desk while I was working. It was just a complete labor of love project. And it is now turned into, well, thanks to COVID as well, I suppose, into a 24/7 Earth Day event on creativelyunited.org, where every day is Earth Day. And in partnering with a variety of organizations, especially Climate in the Arts, who you will see as one of our major partners, we are collaborating and connecting in ways that are really helping to amplify these conversations and to help people realize that trees are important. And as a result, we also host the Community Trees Matter Network. I have a quick 1-minute video. If there's time, I'd love to show you what this is about. Could we run that video just real quick? And then I'll just, if I have any more time, I'll tell you a little bit more. So what I'd really love people to know is that there is a tree toolkit on this website, the Community Trees Matter. And it was really put together by a bunch of us who were absolutely, completely mad about trees. And this tree toolkit has a lot of resources for how people, if they're starting to see the loss of trees in their community, how they could start getting involved. So another thing that we did, and I just love people to go visit the website, it's all free. This is totally accessible, is we did a quick video. This is just a quick trailer I'll show you really quickly in partnership with Ballet Victoria. So we're being very creative in how we're uniting with different organizations to try to amplify messages that may not otherwise get heard. So this film that I'm just going to show you a quick trailer includes original music composed, sung and orchestrated by Canadian multi-award winning legend Anne Mortifee. And it's, well, you'll just see. And it was actually shot in one of the few remaining intact wild urban forests in Victoria, BC. And the idea is to bring awareness to the importance of protecting and preserving our forest habitat. Let's give that a quick look, and then I can talk to you afterwards about other things when we come around to the next question.
For the love of our home, we are taking a stand. We are a tribe, awakening, listening to the heartbeat of a new birth. Earth is you, earth it's me. We're listening to the rhythm of a heartbeat. We're listening to the rhythm of a heartbeat. We're listening to the rhythm of a heartbeat. Ooh.
Thank you. That is actually a 7-minute video. You just saw 43 seconds of it. So if you feel at all inspired by that, I highly recommend that you go to Creatively United, check it out. We also have a YouTube channel with lots of forest videos, everything to do with trees, where we've interviewed urban foresters, where you can post information about trees, you can see the resources, and you can even find letters calling on municipal and provincial officials to save and protect trees. So I've given up. I think I've taken more than enough time. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Frances, and thank you to each of the panelists. We move now on to the main central part of the Tree Appreciation Zoom conversation. Each of the three panelists will talk further from their own personal perspectives about tree appreciation, extending exactly what they have already talked about. In order to assist them, three questions were posed to them to address to today's topic that they might use as a guide. The first question is, what are some of the memorable moments you've had with trees? What are, the second question, the influencing factors that have sustained your interest in trees over the years? And what in your careers keeps you enthused about the trees for life? Some of these comments answers to these questions will be overlapping, but following your views, a Q&A open dialogue will give each of the attendees an opportunity to extend the conversation. Astra will be the moderator of this portion of the Zoom conversation. So I'd like to invite John Innes back to the microphone to address his answers to those questions, however he may wish to do so.
Well, thank you very much, David. It's maybe a bit unfair that I get the first word in, but I'll try. I looked at these questions very carefully, and for me, I find them actually surprisingly difficult to answer. They are actually very closely interrelated because it's the memorable moments that sustain the interest and keep me enthused about trees. So answering it is difficult. Over the course of my career, and it's beginning to come to an end now, I've had the enormous privilege of being able to visit forests and trees around the world. I've been to a huge number of different places, and I've seen many different types of trees. I think I actually have photos of well over 10,000 species of trees. And I have had so many memorable moments that it's actually difficult to separate them out. I remember, for example, visiting forests in Iceland, and that brought me back to a question that I think it was Sarah posed, and it's a question I actually give my students: what is a tree? You could also ask, what is a forest? I was told by one person, if you get lost when you visit an Icelandic forest, the easiest way to find your way out is to stand up and look around, because you'll look over the tops of the trees. But that's not actually quite true. The trees are much bigger and more like what we would expect to find anywhere else. I visited trees in California, the bristlecone pines in the White Mountains. The oldest of those trees is 4,300 years old. And when you think about that, you sit back and you're 4,300, yeah, okay, it's 4,300. But that's before the pyramids were built. Those trees were around. Those trees have survived for so long. It is absolutely, to me, mind-blowing. At the same time, I visited the sequoias, the giant sequoias in the Sierra Nevada. Trees that are absolutely massive in terms of their girth and height. I've also seen equally large trees in Australia. We don't often hear about them, but the Australians would argue that their eucalyptus, or some of their eucalyptus, can actually grow bigger than the sequoias. And there is one that, by the looks of things, was significantly bigger, taller, I should say, than the tallest sequoia in California. As I moved through my career, one of the places I lived in was a village called Selborne in Hampshire. That may or may not mean anything to any of you, but there was person who lived there about 200 years before me called Gilbert White. And he was a naturalist, and he described the forest there and the woodlands, the beech forest it was, with some ash present. And what I tried to do when I was managing that area of forest for the National Trust was to try and start recreating what it might have looked like at the time of Gilbert White. And in doing that, we realized all sorts of things about trees. We tried, for example, to work out, could you pollard trees? Because most of the time when he was there, he describes all these pollards, but today there aren't any, or only the very overgrown forms. So all the time, I would say, over the last 30, 40 years, I've been learning about trees. I've been learning about what lives in them. Memorable moments have often come because of the people associated with the trees, rather than the trees themselves. And what those people have either told me or asked me to do. I'm thinking, for example, in Southern Africa, being presented with mopani worms to eat, which are about the size of your thumb. And yeah, they were okay. Or hornet larvae in the Gaoligong Mountains in China. You ate them live, which I wasn't too keen on. I think very often, if you really need to learn about trees, you need to get up close to them. And I think of a tree called the lookout tree in Western Australia, which is a jarrah tree. And it's a tree that has at the top of it, there is a small platform where people used to go to watch out for forest fires. But to get there, and it's about 35, 40 meters tall, you go up what I guess you could call a ladder, which is actually just spikes driven into the side of the tree. And it goes round as you go up, you work your way up through these. There's no safety bars, there's no ropes, nothing else. You just have to climb. You probably can't do it now. I'm sure the health and safety people will stop it. But in those, when I was there, you could actually go up it still. And as you climb up, you realize you're getting younger and younger. The trees, the wood that you're basically holding on to is younger. The tree, you're getting a better and better view. And you realize just how enormous some of these trees actually are. As I said, very often you can't tell from the ground really the size of a tree. And I do envy, just trying to remember, it wasn't Sarah, it's Francis. As a photographer, I find trees incredibly difficult to photograph, particularly to get a feeling for the scale of the trees. And you know, if you can successfully do that, you have a great deal of admiration. So those are the sorts of moments that really have kept me going. As Dean of the Faculty of Forestry, I've actually had the pleasure of trying to maybe change the direction of our faculty a little bit. When I first arrived in British Columbia, it was really all about logging and cutting forests down, cutting trees down, turning them into 2x4s, exporting it into the United States. I think we've seen a huge change in that. We have introduced an urban forestry program, for example, and that's proven to be extremely popular. People are beginning to appreciate that trees in towns, they don't just come there by accident. They need to be planned, they need to be put in the right places, the right types of trees. We need to think about things like allergies of people. We need to think about what happens if we plant broadleaves and the amount of leaves, all sorts of minor or seemingly minor problems that sometimes turn out to be quite significant. We've also introduced a circular economy program because of the role that trees and wood play in sustainability. And we're working out numerous new ways that we can replace fossil fuels and the products derived from petroleum and coal and gas with products that are sustainable because they come from trees. and trees will grow again after they're harvested. We've spent a lot of time looking at restoration. How do we bring back forests that have been degraded? And I have to say, we've been involved in arguments with all sorts of people over things like the conservation of old growth, something that I'm actually very much in favor of, but not all foresters would agree with that. I think that's something that we're probably going to be hearing. In fact, I know we're going to be hearing quite a bit more about in the next year or two here in British Columbia. So what sustains me, what sustains my enthusiasm for trees is they are such wonderful things, and forests are so wonderful. They do provide all the benefits that I was mentioning earlier. They are part of our lives, and I think it's really important that we maintain them there. I'm very pleased I don't live in Eskimo or Esquimau with its concrete. I can look outside. I have a ginkgo right outside my window, and I have a whole variety of trees that I can just see down beside of me. I don't have this wonderful background, unfortunately, with me, although I was there a couple of years ago. So everything about trees is something that inspires me, and it's something that keeps me going, and it's something that I will continue to work with for the foreseeable future. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Let's bounce back to Sarah Abbott, and could you address each of these three questions either as a whole or as separate, or as you wish?
Sure.
To you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, and thank you, John. I agree that they're very intertwined. I think maybe I'll just reflect a little bit on how I ended up working so closely with trees. It began with my doctoral studies at Royal Roads. I didn't set out to do this project, and an ethnography of trees is part of the title of my doctorate. And I also would never have imagined doing such a work if it weren't for trees. And I'll just say that it wasn't my idea. I think it was the trees' idea. So I ended up pursuing that. And my ethnography took me to three continents. I can't remember how many countries, 8 maybe. And I've interviewed people in Spanish and English. And I interviewed tree knowers. And this connects nicely with what John was saying about it's so wonderful to talk to people who have relationships with trees, lots of different kinds of relationships. And John, I could have interviewed you as a tree knower. Your stories are wonderful. And I guess what's really key for me in my work, what sustains me in my personal life and my career, is a deepening understanding of our interrelationship with all beings, with trees and other non-humans. And it is such a practice to shift my paradigm and start really paying attention to perspectives that aren't just mine or aren't just human. You know, what would the trees or what would the non-humans say? What are they saying? What are they saying that we're not listening to? And this, another aspect of my research is Indigenous research methodologies. So connecting with Indigenous knowledge, and connecting with Indigenous science and ways of being in the world. And as many people know, that is based in a long history of observation and coming to know and realizing that we are in that deep relationship with our other Earth cohabitants. And there's reciprocity and respect and protocols that are built into the culture for a reason. And there is a maintenance of following natural law and not just continually practicing that reciprocity. And so this has really been interesting and deepening of my own understanding of Indigenous ways of being and my own self as well. And as I mentioned before, so communicating between humans and trees is a significant part of my research. So I interviewed a lot of people who have communication with trees on a regular basis in different ways. And I attended workshops. You know, often when I would go and give a tree talk, there would be at least one person who would come up and say, yeah, I talk to trees all the time. And there are people out there who have this ability, and it's innate in all of us. We just have to practice to kind of understand how to connect with trees more, that they are not, I'm going to quote you here, John, not wonderful things, but wonderful beings. And I also consider trees from a theoretical perspective as biosocial beings. So all beings are in constant relationship and growth through not only their own biology and the needs of that biology, but in social relation with all of the beings around them. So one of the memorable moments that I would like to share is a small story. I was asked to give a tree talk for New Dance Horizons, which is a dance organization here in Regina. And they do what's called the Secret Gardens Tour every summer. And it's a fundraiser. So I went into a garden. I connected with a woman who owns a house, and I felt that it was necessary to connect with the trees. This is an important aspect of being sensitive to and communicating with trees. So not just going up and doing what we want to do, we need to communicate with them, we need to ask permission. And so this woman and I went around her garden, and I'll take you in, you come in, imagine there's a house on your left and you come in through the right, and there's a large elm, and then at the back there's 2 pine trees, and on the side there's a younger elm, and in the middle there's an oak. And the oak was sort of the prize from this woman's perspective, because it's very rare to have an oak on the prairies. And this oak ended up being planted by someone related to her husband before they even knew that the house existed to purchase. So they were very moved to purchase the house actually because of the oak. So we went around, we connected with the trees. You could tell, each tree had a different kind of personality, you could feel it. And this tree, on the first one on the right, the elm, you could sense that it was socially probably encouraged to be more social, because it was right there by the entrance. And so then we went around, and I won't go into all the details, I'll just focus on the highlights. So then when we came to the young elm, I was sensing that well, we asked if it would want to participate, and it sort of came forward. And it's really interesting to do this with more than one person, because when we do communicate, we always have to check, is this me or is it the tree? And often it's the tree when a message comes in that is not something that we would ever think about. So I was picking up that the tree would participate, but it was fine, but it just didn't want to be in the spotlight. And then I was also sensing that it felt like the tree felt unrecognized. And so I knew that the oak tree received a lot of attention. And so I asked her if which tree received the least amount of attention. And she said, this elm, this young elm. So it was it confirmed what I was feeling. So I'm going to stop the story there and jump forward 4 days for my time when I'm now getting ready to meet the public and talk about things that I'm talking to you about today. And so I went in, the woman met me, and I went into the back alone to offer some tobacco to all of the trees. And I was quite nervous. And I was by the large oak just to the right, and just sort of recognizing my own nervousness. And all of a sudden I heard this, "Well, you're not dead." And so I had to laugh, because I felt the tree was saying, okay, it's natural to be nervous. And so when I turned to face the garden, the woman had really gone to great extent to decorate it. She was so excited to have people through, and she had a screen up with some old, not old, but some birch wallpaper on it. And on around the young elm, she put like a banner, I guess, with the little triangles that are all attached to a piece of string or rope. And I know from my research that trees don't necessarily like to have things around them. And so when I saw that, I thought, I had that feeling, but I was like, okay, that's probably me, you know, because this is what I've picked up. So I went around to the trees, and I went to the young elm, and I was getting that the elm wasn't very happy. And I was sort of resisting, you know, that it could have been the banner. And I was getting, so I started, the energy, the message seemed to be that. So I started to pursue that. And I was like, well, you know, I don't know if you're feeling this way, but I mean, the woman, she went to such great extent to decorate. It looks so nice. You look fantastic. And it was just like the tree was having none of that and felt really infantilized. And so I mean, you know, I don't know. So I said, okay, I'll go talk to the woman, and I'll just see, you know, we Canadians, we just don't like to, we like to be polite and keep things going, right? So I went out to the front, and I asked her to come back, and I asked her to come to the tree with me. And she had never, our time 4 days prior to that, she had not communicated with trees before. And so, but she was also picking up on similar things as me. And so we came to the tree, and I asked her to connect with it. And she immediately felt a kind of vertigo. And she said, oh, this tree is not happy. And so I told her, you know, what I thought the reason was. And so we took off. She took off that bib. I was thinking of it as a bib that was coming to my mind. And so she took it off and she hung it somewhere else. And she said, oh my gosh, this tree just feels so much better now. And so that was interesting. But then when I said, well, why did you put the tree, that banner thing around the tree? Because the tree had said that it didn't want to be spotlighted. And she said, well, you know how when you really want to give a child a lot of attention. And I just was like shocked that she said that, because I had been picking up that the tree felt infantilized. So I do know that what I'm talking about is very untraditional. And, you know, perhaps some people are just like, okay, whatever. But I got to tell you, you know, there's just too many people who I've encountered in my research who have these communications with trees. And so what's come forward is that the trees want to collaborate with us. And I had the very great pleasure of just a few days ago being in conversation with Monica Gagliano on a public talk event. And some of you might know Monica Gagliano's book, Thus Spoke the Plant. She's a very prominent research plant scientist. And she was also talking about how being in this Australian piece of land that she has, that the trees are guiding people to do things, change things on the land so that the land is working better. And these are things that the humans would not have thought about. So just to wrap up, you know, what keeps me going in my life and career is moving to be an advocate for trees, for the voices of trees, to encouraging environmental empathy, and looking through the perspectives of trees and respecting their voices and allowing those voices to come through, and knowing that it's tough work. What I'm talking about is woo-woo, you know, in science fields, but this is moving forward, and there's been so much work on the intelligence of plants and trees. So with that, I will finish and pass it over to Frances. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wow, Sarah, that is so inspiring. And John, holy. I would have to say that I started to notice in myself that the more time I I spent in nature and in the forest, the more in touch with my emotions I became. And the forest was my friend as a child. I actually grew up in foster care, and I grew up near a forest that was, they were like my friends. Those trees were my friends. And I honestly felt such a connection, and I didn't think of it in any other way as extended family. They were like my extended family. And I think it's far from woo-woo, to be absolutely honest with you, because if we look back on how the First Nations have viewed the interconnectivity of everything, of trees, they see it as an extension of family. The spirit of family is embodied in those trees. And back in the day, you think, you know, someone would, I mean, they would bury their dead in the trees, or, you know, people would bury a loved one under a tree, or plant a tree for a loved one. And all of that is being imbued into these trees. So life is very much full circle when it comes to trees, with all the ways that nature interacts with the tree, including ourselves. We can't see ourselves any longer as separate from nature. We are absolutely part of nature. I don't know why we think we're above it or different from it. We are nature. It's all part and parcel. And we actually just keep growing like trees do. We just keep this process just keeps giving. And so I started to recognize like that trees were really starting to open my heart, which had been closed, to protect myself because of what I had gone through in my life. And it was just like such a healing feeling. And when, you know, when they talk about tree huggers, well, I put up my hand. I've been one of those people who said, you know what, why is it all these years that, you know, anybody who seems to love or revere nature is regarded as an enemy? When, I mean, and that attitude is very much changing now as people are starting to awaken to this. But it's time for us to really actually see those people as, I mean, I have, as the hero workers. The people saving these trees are the hero workers. So for example, the people, there's a whole bunch of people right now that are like battling out the cold and the wind and the rain, and trying to stave off like forestry companies from carving their way through into one of our last intact watersheds known as Fairy Creek, a very beautiful intact watershed, one of the last remaining groves of old growth. And those people, in my opinion, are doing the hero work on all our behalf, and they deserve our fullest support. And that was what made me realize that, okay, I'm back when I started Creatively United, when this came to me as a germ of an idea in 2010, because my heart could not determine how to deal with the devastation I was seeing outside of my window and hearing about every day. I thought, you know, I've got to do something. And it's amazing how action can really help you remove that grief. And so it's that we all need to have a sense, I think, of hopefulness, and being involved is what makes me feel hopeful for our future. And what I've come to realize is there's a lot of people who love trees, like really love trees. And now it's a matter of us really having to get the ear and change this paradigm we're in, because people are starting to get that people aren't happy with just everything being seen as a resource for money. And who's benefiting from that? We're not benefiting, especially when you think about in this time of so-called climate emergency, where all these municipalities are adopting climate emergency as their catchphrase, but yet what are they doing about it? They're still cutting trees. It is just imperative that we keep this conversation growing, because climate change isn't something out there. These trees are, as John says, they are essential to our survival. They are essential to our well-being. I mean, trees, it's a known fact. When streets have trees, the rate of asthma goes down, the rate of crime goes down. Trees are the hardest working members of our community, all unpaid, no pension plan, hardly any thanks for that matter. And they are like mitigating stormwater. They're helping cool our streets. They're providing us shade and shelter. They're providing beauty. They're providing habitat. They're providing essential services for all life in such a way that we haven't even begun to comprehend. And what Sarah's talking about is like maybe on that quantum physics level that we're just beginning to understand that there is something far more amazing happening than what we even have given credit to. So I am a proud tree hugger, and this is something that a cartoon friend of mine created, and I just love it. I mean, I just love trees, and that's how I see them. They are so filled with grace and heart and love. It's beyond. So I can't help but put myself out there to find solutions to help protect and preserve as many trees as possible, because we need them. And one thing that a lot of people don't know, and in talking to the municipalities that makes me crazy when it comes to them cutting down trees, is they say, oh, well, you know, they may have taken down that, you know, massive established oak tree, but they're going to plant 2 trees. And I'm like, well, what the carbon sequestration and the benefits of one mature tree is like the equivalent of 200 plus saplings. So how can they say that replacing one big tree with 1 or 2 perhaps inappropriate trees or shrubs or saplings is going to cut it? It isn't. So this is where we need a serious wake-up call, that these mature trees that we have are beyond precious. So I know I'm preaching to the converted, but I just have to say, this is where I've also been told in a conversation actually I had last night with someone who is a Métis woman who's very connected spiritually to trees. She said the message that she has heard from trees is we have to keep as many big trees as we can, because their ability to communicate with us and with the network doesn't even start till they're at least age 10. They have to grow up too. So we need to be keeping our big trees. They are the stewards. They're the keepers of the knowledge, the language. It's just like, as First Nations have said, they are the matriarchs and the patriarchs of the families. And if you even look at groves of trees or trees together, you can see that symbiosis of them being a family. You can see the little trees and the bigger trees, and you can see their interconnection. It's just a beautiful thing. So enough said for now. On to the next question.
Thank you very much to each of one of you, John, Sarah, and Francis. I believe the program now goes over to Astra in order that each one of us can enter into the conversation of the Tree Appreciation Zoom and be part of that. Astra, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, David. And thank you to our panelists for such interesting conversations so far. We're going to move it on to the Q&A portion here. So as we open the floor to question and answers, if you haven't sent a question in yet, feel free to use the raise hand button, which you can find again by clicking participants and raise hand, which should be on the right for you. Or if you aren't able to find that, you could put a star in the chat box or write your question in the chat box, and we'll get to those as much as we can. Let me see here. So first question here, just going back to it. For Sarah, how do trees communicate with you, Sarah?
Thank you for the question. How do trees communicate with me? I think I've had communications directly. I think to answer the question, actually, I'm going to talk about how trees communicate. which is that they work through our individual senses, our understanding. So it's not, so I once had a question, what language do they communicate in? Language sort of, well, language as we know it sort of becomes irrelevant. So I've had a communication that has been like a message coming in from the left as sound, so a voice saying some words, and I could see the words. I've had something come in through a dream. I know that sometimes there'll be communications with a tree and things will happen in life. Now I'm speaking broadly to somebody I interviewed who's very, very connected to Palo Santo trees in Ecuador, would speak to the Palo Santo and things would just kind of happen in strange ways, you know, like a bunch of bats would come and unfortunately infiltrate a bunch of cattle who were eating the Palo Santo saplings. And I kind of think we've got, you know, our intuition, but it feels like an intuitive field where when we tune in more, we can sense more what's coming from us and what's not coming from us. You know, and I don't always communicate. I am finding too that because I'm an academic and I'm doing a doctorate, there's a lot of work that I have to do with the left side of my brain. And I feel that that actually prevents me from being in more of that sort of right-brained open state. Meditation, I think, is a really important thing to do regularly so that when we are wanting to communicate, we can quieten our mind and be more open. I did actually have, you don't have to be by the tree. Well, first of all, if you want to connect with a tree, ask for permission to connect with it. And you don't have to touch it, even you can be standing on the roots or just a little bit back. It's a kind of energetic connection. And things can happen even over distance. And I actually was surprised. Probably a lot of you know this book, Big Lonely Doug. It's a tree that's in your area. And I read this book pretty quickly. And I kind of thought it would be neat to connect with the tree. I finished the book sort of late at night and I was planning just to go to bed and connect with the tree later. And but the tree, I think, wanted to connect with me. And so all of a sudden I'm just like taking all of these notes based on what's coming through with this tree. And this tree was named by Ken Wu, who's was a very prominent activist who's now moved to Quebec. Big Lonely Doug, that's what he named it. And when I connected with the tree, I'll just share a few things that came through. And that was actually that loneliness was really low on the list. It really felt embarrassed. And just for those of you who haven't seen the image, this is Big Lonely Doug. So Big Lonely Doug is not surrounded by Big Lonely Doug's community. He had a lot of care for the other trees in his community and his whole community, and he felt lost with the spotlight that he received. He felt shame. He feels shame. I'm using the pronoun he, but I want to recognize the anthropocentric assumptions with that. And I said, why do you feel shame? And Big Lonely Doug, or actually the name that kind of came through was Lee, which is interesting. You know, and Lee said, I'm nothing without the forest around me. And I said, do you feel lonely? He said, yes, but not in the way that people think. And I asked if Lee could elaborate. And I, again, answering the question about how trees communicate, sometimes it's like an image or a feeling, and I just felt like extremely nauseous. And Lee said that he felt stupid. He had this wisdom for nothing because he can't share it because no one listens. And I said, a little later, I said, "You're a powerful tree." And he said, "Yes, but," and then I had an image of evaporation. You know, was that the wisdom evaporating? And then I also picked up this really high pitch sound, this loud sound. And there's a lot of sound in the forest, as you all know. And when you see this, you think there's not that much sound around Lee right now. But actually, what if that is sound? That is sound. It's not the sound that we think it is. And that is like a deafening sound for Lee. So it's a very anthropocentric thing to say Big Lonely Doug, because that's our view. He doesn't have his buddies around him, but it's much, much more profound than that. So I hope that answers the question. Some people are constantly hearing trees. I am not constantly hearing trees, but have discovered some of the ways that tree messages can come through.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. Just checking, it looks like we have a couple folks with raised hands. So first is Jerlene Gibb. If you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, go right ahead.
Hi. I actually have some comments to make. And one is that here is let's see if I can get it to you, photograph. And that is an upside down photograph of our bronchial system in our lungs. And I'm thinking, here's this relationship between oxygen and carbon dioxide and the in-breath and out-breath and the relationship with trees. And isn't it interesting that our own bronchial system inside our lungs kind of forms these tree-like branches? So there's kind of, it's upside down, but it's kind of our internal tree, which I thought was kind of interesting. Anyway, that's one thing. Then the second thing is, I was interested in buying a bowed psaltery, and I got involved with a number of luthiers, and it's interesting to talk about wood with people who build instruments. This fellow from Oklahoma sources his spruce from Alaska. Just a certain kind of wood, a certain type of, and I had to make a decision when this was being built, whether it was going to be a walnut base or a spruce top, or whether there was going to be any ebony. When you get into talking with people who build instruments and their relationship with different kinds of trees and the wood that they produced in terms of how that instrument produces sound, that's so I think that would be an interesting exploration. And the third thing was there's a development going out in Souk along the Jordan River where trees are just being slashed down. And I don't know what kind of, it's for the purpose of building more housing and community, but there's nothing there talking about what that housing community is actually going to look like. And, when we look at what's happened in Colwood and out in Langford, just a complete destruction of what would be kind of healthy community living. It's just streets with boxes. You don't know where the direction is. You don't know where there's a center to anything. It's And, you know, Premier of our promise, that's his constituency. And I would like to, you know, just sort of twig people's thoughts about looking into Souk now and what's happening with the logging and the relationship between housing developments and community development and cutting down of trees. I mean, I don't mind personally if the trees are cut down, as long as the development that's taking place is as good as a forest for humanity. You know, it's but when developers come in and there's no plan and there's no sense of power or control on the part of the municipalities to dictate what kind of communities are going to be built and what the look and feel is going to be, the healthiness of it, I just don't understand why there isn't a stronger and more visible relationship. This should be something that could be a really happy, creative approach for all of our communities to be able to look at the excitement of the development of something that's good for everybody and has a sense of beauty and aesthetic for humanity. And so those are my 3 points. And, you know, I really appreciate this little talk. And, but I think, you know, if we do this again, I think it would really be neat to get some instrument makers involved with their views on different kinds of woods and trees and why you choose this over that for this type of instrument and the kind of sound it's going to produce. Because it's all resonating light and sound vibrations. Anyway, there you go. That's me.
Can I jump in?
Yep.
I just want to say, well done. Thanks for bringing that up. That's very interesting. I also think, you know, we have to get more creative in how we do things. as you are obviously a very creative person. So when I look at, you know, more established neighborhoods, it looks like the developers back in the day actually figured out how to work with nature, because I mean, the cross street from me is a house built on a giant rock. There's trees, mature trees, which we wouldn't have given the current rate of development and the way it's being done these days. So all I'm trying to say is that I feel like we all individually need to take more of an active interest in our municipal governments, because that's where we have some say in what goes on in our communities. We may not feel like we have much say, but that is going to be the case if nobody has any say. And so getting more actively vocal and having some say at these meetings, if nothing else, to let them know that it's time to really review where are we at with the way we're doing building. Because if they've, especially if your municipality or region has declared a climate emergency, they need to start walking their talk. And one of the ways they can do it is by looking at, you know, antiquated ways of the way they're doing things. If there's an opportunity, Astra and team, I would love to show the trees for all trades, or whatever I think it's called, trees for all seasons. It's put together by the city of Halifax. And this is a video that I have personally taken to different council meetings, asked to have 5 minutes on their agenda. And I encourage everyone else to do the same and just show this video. Because they allow you generally 3 to 5 minutes, sometimes 10. And this is a really powerful 5-minute video. Would that be okay? Would it be appropriate to do this right now?
Let me see. Just checking the time here. I'm wondering if maybe we could save it for the end and people who have time to stay on at the end could watch it. And then if they don't have time to stay on past 4, we could send a link out as well. Does that sound okay?
It's up to you. I can cut whatever I was going to say short later, and love to show that video because it's extremely well done and very creative.
Well, I was wanting to just jump in for 1 second because having been in business myself, and you know, one of the problems with a lot of the people who might be advocates for trees, or you know, is the mechanism for social activism actually destroys relationships. I mean, I think if we had new models, like, oh, we're going to have a new community, more like what the Amish would do, you know, and the whole community is getting excited about the fact that we're cutting down trees on the Jordan River and we're going to be building a new community. And how can we celebrate? How can we lift up the designers? How can we lift up the, you know, they put up barriers and it lowers their consciousness because of activists that come in to try to tear them down when they haven't a clue about the amount of risk people are taking financially to even stick their necks out to build a community, to build houses, to be able to do, you know, there is a lot of stuff that goes behind the people are taking responsibility for development. And, you know, I think that there needs to be a more positive respect rather than activists just seeing it as an opportunity to tear a bunch of people down and to find themselves being critical. And I think we need to find a new model that's more enhancing in terms of community celebration and I think we'd find, you know, a lot more people being willing to kind of work together and to celebrate and honor one another rather than find ways of being critical.
Absolutely. And I think it goes beyond just, you know, it's not being necessarily critical, it's being creative. And that's my approach.
That's it. And respecting one another, honoring humanity. I think a lot of the bad stuff that happens in creation, bad decisions people make, is because they're just not lifted up and honored enough to allow them to rise to another level of consciousness. And
I think Draylene, thank you very much for your ideas and thoughts. I think, Francis, regarding the video, I think the idea of saving it until the end of the program might work well. Otherwise, it's available on Creatively United.
It's not a video we produce. We do mention it on the Community Trees Matter Network, which is on Creatively United under our tree toolkit and information. You can see it there, but it is, like I say, it is a really inspiring video. So okay,
I think with our timing, I would like to hold it in a sidebar in the side room, and recall that it is available for us to use at another time. Astra, do we have any other questions? Maybe we can take one or two more.
Yeah, for sure. We have another raised hand from Irfane Fancy. So if you want to unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hi there. Just what Francis was saying, I think
So sorry to interrupt. We just can't hear you very well. Could you speak up a little?
Okay. What Francis was saying, can you hear me now?
A bit better, yeah.
Okay. What Francis was saying about the situation with being creative about trees in general, the District of North Saanich is going to be working on the tree protection bylaw on Wednesday, and I get a chance to say a little something about that. So I'm hoping that they'll be going in the right direction. But my question is for John about silviculture. Is that of any use? Is that going to be expanded? Does that in any way protect us, because the logging companies are still logging trees for profit? We need to replace trees at least if they're going to be taken down.
Thank you, and that's actually a very interesting question. Silviculture is what forestry should be about. Unfortunately, in British Columbia, silviculture is considered simply to be the replanting of trees after the harvest has been done, and until the trees reach what is called free to grow stage, which is basically saplings that are about maybe 2 to 3 meters tall. At that point, a company's silvicultural obligations are handed back to the province, and the province then manages, or is supposed to manage, those trees through the rest of their life cycle. That doesn't happen. In Europe, a forester's job is to grow trees, not to cut them down. And so all foresters are essentially silviculturalists. And is actually very difficult to separate the concept of silviculture from forestry. But as I said, here is a very different pattern. And I actually do believe silviculture could solve many of the problems that we currently face and could actually address some of the issues, but not all of the issues related to the sorts of problems that have been discussed here. So silviculture is something that is very important. It goes right back in time. And we see, you could argue that many people thousands of years ago, whether it be Aboriginal people in Australia or First Nations here or elsewhere, have been practicing silviculture in one form or another. And that knowledge has largely either been ignored or lost in today's industrial forest landscape.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, thank you, John. It is indeed a couple of new directions that tree appreciation could take us that we need to keep in mind as we do some further planning around our program of Royal Commonwealth Society, Vancouver Island, Trees for Life. I'd like to take this moment now to thank each of our panelists for their time, their expertise, their insight, and their comments. And to do so, I'd like to, on behalf of the Royal Commonwealth Society, Vancouver Island, offer each of them a book. We would like to gift to you, John, a book called Around the World in 80 Trees by Jonathan Drury. In this book, Jonathan uses plant science to illuminate how trees play a role in every part of human life, from the romantic to the regrettable, from raw materials, from everything from aspirin to maple syrup. To Sarah Abbott, we would like to gift you the book of Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. As a botanist, Robin has been trained to ask questions of nature with the tools of science. As a member of the Indigenous nation and community, she embraces the notion that plants and animals are our oldest teachers. In Braiding Sweetgrass, she sets the pattern for us to weave together Indigenous knowledge with the scientific knowledge, with sacred knowledge and historical knowledge, as clever as it is wise. And to Francis, we would like to gift you the book, Thus Spoke the Plant by Monica Galliano, which I think Sarah mentioned. In this collection of stories written in partnership with plant research scientists, Monica reveals the dynamic role plants play in genuine firsthand accounts from her research into plant communication and cognition. By transcending the view of plants as the objects of scientific materialism, Gagliano encourages us to rethink plants as beings with their own special and unique subjectivity, consciousness, and volition, and hence having the capacity for their own perspectives and voices. And so to each of those panelists, we'd like to extend our appreciation for your involvement and engagement in our Zoom conversation. In Zooming the summation, I'd like to mention that the Royal Commonwealth Society is exploring the ecological nature, the ethics, and the essence of trees. And it is certainly a stretch for the Society's usual parameters. Nevertheless, this is an effort to widen the horizons and extend the edges of what it means to live more fully on the good earth with nature at its heart and with trees, so to speak, as the sinews of being. Trees have been around since time immemorial, or as some would say, at least from the third day of creation, and are the living beings of the earth that hold essential and even sacred knowledge and wisdom of the ways for life in its breadth and its fullness, as we have heard from each of the panelists. Part of my own personal current fascination with trees was seeded during my childhood time when my family was living in Calgary. We had a large willow tree in our backyard, which was one of the best climbing trees that I have ever known. I relished climbing up to the upper branches regularly and even had built a special place where I could retreat for quiet and contemplation. It was not a tree house, but a mere mini platform for isolation and loneliness, to experience the value of being by myself in the embrace of the willow tree. At that age, I don't think I was in a place to communicate with the tree, but I had a sense of safety and security in the shelter of the willow tree. The tree world over the last few decades has grown and been grounded in the platform of the Royal Commonwealth Society, Vancouver Island. And so it's in our age of the 2020 era, we realize that Royal Commonwealth Society Vancouver has a much longer history than my own personal years, but it has a much shorter history in the world of trees. The beginning of the Royal Commonwealth Society Vancouver Island happened in 1919, then known as the Royal Colonial Institute, and over the years has changed and morphed and redirected its emphasis in the world of its purpose and its name. And so in 2020, the Royal Commonwealth Society Vancouver Island is celebrating a centennial of living the basic principles of the Commonwealth, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law in all its variations and permutations. As an integral part of the centennialization of the Society, this theme, Trees for Life, has been chosen to be central to each of its ongoing programs at this time in its evolution. And I find that there are four major pieces that make up the RCSVI mosaic that came together for the Society to choose the Trees for Life as the subject. The first piece is that the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Malta in 2015 agreed to endorse the Queen's Commonwealth canopy as an essential ecological stance of the global society. Each nation agreed to designate a forest to the canopy, and if that particular nation did not have a forest, they agreed to plant trees for the canopy. Now, Canada's contribution to the canopy has been the Great Bear Rainforest, officially made in 2016. The second piece of the mosaic so happens to be that this week in November is generally designated as the Municipal Tree Appreciation Week. Cities in the past have chosen to celebrate trees and promote a new awareness of trees in the urban context. However, in 2020, C19 has curtailed and even in some cases eliminated those events. except I have learned that in central Saanich, seedlings are being made available all week at the municipal hall. Residents can drop by, pick them up, and then plant them on private property. And then Saanich municipality is holding an outdoor event at Mount Douglas Park next Saturday on the 7th of November. The third piece of the mosaic in this initial tree appreciation Zoom conversation is that the Royal Commonwealth Society Vancouver Island is seeking to do its small part to fill part of the void for some municipalities with this dialogue opportunity, and thus is able to spend some time commemorating not only the history of the society, but also its expectations for a future of diversity with dignity and inclusivity with integrity. And that leads me to the fourth piece of the puzzle of the mosaic. It revolves around the decision that it would be very appropriate to think about planting trees somewhere in our region. And so conversations began and led us to talk with the Parks Department with the City of Victoria. With them, a locale was chosen that is known as the Triangle Green in the city's downtown area. This small triangular site on the eastern side of the inner harbor adjacent to the Johnson Street Bridge is being transformed into a mini garden oasis of appreciation, commemoration, and anticipation. The species of trees the Parks Department has chosen for the green is known as the Nyssa sylvatica, or the black gum or the black tupelo tree. One has been discovered, one of these Nyssa sylvaticas, to be growing in our neighborhood at Butchert Gardens. The new trees that will be planted in the Triangle Green will be received as new neighbors about to live in a new community. And so the Trees for Life initiative expresses the hopes and provides the hints of how the Royal Commonwealth Society Vancouver will look and be in the time to come, being grateful for the past and being gracious for the future. We trust that each of you who are attending this Zoom conversation, Trees Appreciation, will join us in the journey of respect, curiosity, and service as we continue to discover more fully the role of trees and that the role that they play for life, for the living, and for the lively. So that brings us to the portion of our program this afternoon, whereby we need to, if I can just find my final notes here. Oh, how are we doing for time? Francis, I see that we have perhaps a little bit of extra time here, and I'm wondering if you have that video nearby at your fingertips that we could take a look at it.
Okay, well, you guys have an all-star team there that has that video. What I'd also just quickly like to mention is that we have a number of videos. There's one also on covenants, like how to protect and preserve the trees if you have property and you want to know how to have that last maybe beyond your lifetime. There's a video that we also have about that. But sure, thank you for the opportunity. Let's show the Halifax Trees for All Trades video, because I think it really encapsulates everything we've heard here today. Thank you.
This is an air conditioner. Here's a group of them. It's also a water filter, an air purifier, a bike rack, a stimulus package, a therapist, a ShamWow, crime stopper, noise reducer, traffic calmer, and, oh right, a tree. Let me explain. There are a lot of trees in the Halifax region. How many? Maybe 1,000? Maybe 100,000? Well, try 52 million. Put together, all those trees are part of what we call the urban forest. In fact, the municipality has a 442-page long document about this called the Urban Forest Master Plan. And if you're wondering why we need 442 pages for, trees, you've come to the right place. Because as it turns out, trees aren't just pretty things to look at. They actually provide many important benefits. For example, air purification. In a city, the air can easily become polluted, whether that's from industrial activity or even just traffic from the streets. Now, one way to make sure our air is clean and breathable is to purify it with cool things like the smog-free tower. It sucks in pollutants from the air, turns it into rings, and costs just $54,000 each. Or you could plant a tree, because trees are experts at cleaning the air. They trap airborne pollutants with their leaves and take in carbon dioxide through photosynthesis. In total, we estimate trees in Halifax trap 1,478 metric tons of pollutants every year. So next time you're, breathing, you can thank a tree for that. Here's another benefit. Trees are cool to be around. Literally. Yeah, they provide shade for people in nearby buildings, but they also cool through a process called evapotranspiration. On a hot sunny day, trees are releasing water into the atmosphere, cooling the air around them, and that is crucial for a city. You see, urban areas have a lot of surfaces that either create heat or reflect heat, and that usually means cities are hotter than their surroundings, a phenomenon known as the urban heat island effect. So, is the solution to set up a bunch of air conditioners on our streets? Heck no. Plant a tree instead. Here's one more. When it rains in Halifax, which is quite often, that water has to go somewhere, and if not handled properly, it can lead to flooding and erosion. Well, trees play an essential role in handling that storm water. They slow it down with their foliage, while their roots absorb water and stabilize the soil around them. They're kind of like a living ShamWow. Remember those? Anyways, trees come with a lot of benefits, and it turns out you can do the math on how valuable they are. With that, many smart people have calculated that trees in Halifax provide $9.6 million worth of air purifying services, $12.4 million worth of cooling, and $2.1 million in savings for stormwater management. In fact, it's estimated that for every dollar we spend on a tree in Halifax, we get $8 back in benefits. But money isn't even half the story here. Studies have linked urban trees to lowering stress, reducing crime, reducing noise, slowing down traffic, lowering road rage, reducing the number of accidents, increasing property values, and yeah, it's a lot. So if there's one thing you need to take away from all this, it's that trees are really, really useful and important. But if you can spare a bit more time, I want to leave you with two more things. Size isn't always everything in life, but when it comes to trees, it makes all the difference. Larger trees means more air purification, more cooling, and more water absorption. And it's not just that bigger trees are better. The relationship between a tree's size and its benefits is exponential. That means as a tree grows, its benefits grow faster. I'm not a mathematician, but I think all that really goes to say it's important to keep trees around for their whole lives because their benefits are greatest when they have a chance to fully mature. Look at this photo taken of the Halifax Hyderstone houses just after they were built in 1921. Those little saplings weren't doing much back then, but today those same trees are giving back all kinds of benefits to this neighborhood. Where a tree is located is key. As a general rule of thumb, the closer trees are to people, the more good they can do for people. A really effective spot is the space between the sidewalk and the road. That's where a tree can provide shade and cooling for nearby buildings while absorbing pollutants from road traffic and, all that stuff I mentioned earlier. And that can be tricky. In many cities, this part of the road is also used for power lines, and having trees growing near these lines can be a hazard. That being said, the city's position is that it's still very much worth the effort to plant trees here and share the space, because the benefits are that valuable. On top of that, they'll soon be rolling out a program to prune street trees regularly, every 7 years, to help manage those risks. And that's just great. So, to recap, trees are valuable. Bigger trees are even more valuable, and the closer trees are to us, the more they benefit us. Now, I have to be honest with you. Deep down, I don't think we like trees because of their ability to sequester carbon, provide shade, or absorb stormwater. There's something more about trees that draws us to them, something that's hard to put into words or numbers. But the thing is, a lot of the time, that intangible feeling we have about trees makes it difficult to defend keeping them. On paper, they become a pretty thing to look at, a nice to have, but ultimately a second priority. But the reality is, trees are an essential part of our cities, and if doing a bit of math helps us appreciate them a bit more, well, I'm all for it. Money may not literally grow on trees, but it most definitely pays to have trees around. To learn more about the role of trees in Halifax, visit the city's urban forestry page at their website.
Thanks for the opportunity to show that. I think that's a really important video, that it's just clever and creative, and it's an easy one to share.
And thank you, Francis, and thank you, John, and thank you, Sarah. And we will, I find that a nice summation of our whole tree appreciation Zoom conversation today. It was mentioned earlier in the program that a door prize would be available for someone who is remaining with us through this program. And Astra, you are going to look after that.
Yeah. So thank you, David. Just a note for the audience that after this event, we will get, you'll be receiving an email in your inbox with information that's been shared throughout this. I know we've got a lot of different resources that have been shared with us that are great, and links to books, videos, and more, everything that was discussed in today's event, which will arrive in your inbox shortly after the close of the event. Just moving on to the door prize draw. So this evening, our door prize draw will be for a book gift card. And we will just start screen sharing the randomizer that we're using to do that draw. Oh, actually, it looks like we have time for a couple more questions before we do that. So I'll just go back. I know there was a question for John that came in a while back. Let me see here. Yeah, okay, so this one requires a bit of on-the-go math. So if we are not able to answer it right away, no worries, we can come back to it maybe. But the question for John is there information to calculate how much carbon an acre of natural forest on coastal BC can store each year? How much would be stored over 50 years? And how many cars does this represent? Not sure if you're able to get the answers for those right away, but if you have any initial thoughts, go for it.
Yes, those numbers have been calculated. I don't have them in my head. I'd have to do a little bit of checking, and I would ask whether or not we can use hectares rather than acres, because I know all the numbers are done in metric. So I'm assuming it will be okay if we do give you a figure for the hectare, but I can dig that out for you. It does depend on the forest very much. So an area of valley bottom old growth will be very different to a valley side forest, which in turn will be very different to, for example, the dwarf forest that you would find near Tofino. So it does vary from forest to forest.
Okay, awesome, John. And maybe we can get that information and resources sent out a bit later. There was another question that came in for you, John, again, that was, how deep do you think the association is in students of forestry between hot button issues like climate change and forestry from your viewpoint as an educator?
I didn't catch the beginning. How deep?
Yeah, sorry. How deep do you think the association is for students of forestry between hot button issues like climate change and forestry from your viewpoint as an educator?
I don't really understand that question, but the views that are being expressed here are shared by some, but not all, of forestry students. I think it rather depends on whether or not they are from the group that focus on conservation, or the group that focus more on forest management, or the group that looks at forest operations. So I think that's probably what's meant here, but I'm not really sure. So as I said, the views expressed are Suzanne Simard, one of our faculty members, would be very much encouraged by what's being said here. But there are others who don't agree with all of her views.
Great. Thanks, John, for giving us that answer to those couple quick questions. It looks like we are ready to do our door prize draw now, so we'll just share our screen while we do that. Okay, congratulations to Peter. So Peter, if you are able to privately message Nikki Tellum in this chat with your email address, that would be much appreciated. You can do that by going to the chat and clicking who you are sending it to and sending it specifically to Nikki Tellum. All right, I will pass it off to David to close the event off then.
Oh, congratulations, Peter, on being the recipient of our door prize. Some of you may know Peter as the president of the Royal Commonwealth Society, Canada, lives in Ottawa. And he's been around the mulberry bush of the Royal Commonwealth Society for many years, and we appreciate his leadership. And there was nothing set up to ensure that he got that door prize. So thank you to everyone who participated. Particularly, I'd like to thank the Threesome that put all this program together, Nikki, Sage, and Ramya, as well as Astra, who is the fourth in that threesome, who was hosting our meeting. I'd also like to thank a couple of people who have contributed to the Trees for Life program and the Education Legacy Fund that the Royal Commonwealth Society has, the Flagstone Fund that is managed by the Victoria Foundation, Government House, Linda Baker, Trish Upton, and the Scarlet Brimmers. So we wish everybody a good journey in and through the trees, whether it be the natural forest or the urban forest. And may the foliage of trees embrace you. May the leaves fall gently, and may you be rooted in the ground of all being. And that brings us to the end of our opportunity this afternoon, and look forward to keeping in touch with you through the email technology of the 21st century. Cheerio.
Thank you.